Living with type 1 diabetes, we often worry about losing things, losing our vision, nerve sensation, kidney function, the ability to sense low blood sugar, and even losing years to our lives and opportunities in our lives. Today, we're going to talk about something we can add, something we should be adding, and that's muscle. I'm Gary Scheiner, owner and clinical director of Integrated Diabetes Services. Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, where our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in this program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Please discuss any changes to your treatment plan with your personal healthcare provider before implementing. Today's topic is add some muscle to your diabetes management. I'm joined by my longtime friend and colleague, Chris Rudin. Chris is a type 1 athlete and a motivational speaker who lost an arm and still went on to become a world record powerlifter and who's competed on NBC's Titan Games. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's so awesome to be here after all these years,
Every time I think of motivational speakers, I always think of that SNL Chris Farley character. I think his name was Matt Foley, the motivational speaker. That was hilarious. You're not that kind of motivational speaker.
First year motivational speaking was probably closer to that, but I'm very fortunate to have drifted away from that image,
Did he dress with the plaid blue jacket? And
I will neither confirm nor deny your question.
Well, tell our audience a little bit more about yourself. And tell us also about your diabetes diagnosis and about the event that led to loss of your arm.
Yeah, so I was born with complications, and I have two fingers on my left hand and shorter left arm right now. Usually have a super cool prosthetic arm, and it's somewhere around the house, as it usually is. So I was born technically with all of my fingers, and my ulna and radius were not fused together properly. So they ended up amputating the majority of the bones in my left hand, including most of the fingers. So I was left kind of with the pinky and the thumb. And I grew up my life different. I looked very different than most people. And that led to me hiding my disability for almost 17 years. I think even when I first met you, very first, I was still wearing a glove hiding my disability. So I've battled the mental and physical components of having a disability or difference the majority of my life. And of course, as welcoming as diabetes is at 19, it welcomed me with open arm, singular, to the condition. And it was like the best and worst thing that ever happened to me, because diabetes was the catalyst that helped me say, like, I can't be disabled and diabetic. Like, after a certain point, I got to stop collecting these things like bottle caps and do something. So that led to everything that I do today. Now I'm a professional speaker by trade. I met Gary back in the day when I was also doing fitness coaching, and I had one of the largest type 1 diabetic run fitness programs on the internet. And I've helped hundreds of people lose thousands of pounds with and without diabetes by treating people like people instead of just numbers. So now I've been on TV shows, I've been in magazines, but I don't hide my disability anymore. And diabetes was what kind of got me through in the weirdest way, because we know how tough it can be, but it was definitely the signal. So now I'm here and full-time speaker. I coach other speakers. I still do very little fitness stuff, but broke a few world records in powerlifting, bodybuilding as well, wrote a few books, and now I play pickleball because that's what we do when we get old. So we're here.
Yeah, right. One of my favorite sayings, I kind of coined this thing. It's when the going gets tough, the tough adapt. And you're probably the epitome of that, having adapted to not just living with diabetes, but having limited use of one of your arms. I play basketball with a guy who has a similar issue. He has limited use of one arm, only a couple of semi-functional fingers on the hand. And that guy, he is a vicious rebounder. He is just he plays above and beyond what you would expect. So what role have these challenges played in shaping the person that you've become?
I will say, like, one of my favorite books by Ryan Holiday is The Obstacle is the Way. But the whole concept is like the obstacle in the way usually is the way. Diabetes was a huge challenge for me. And instead of like running away from it, I asked myself, like, what could I do with this? there's no motivation that's going to fix diabetes or my disability. There's no positive thinking that's going to make it not real or not tough to deal with. So I want to like clear that up. There's no like finish line to mental health or anything like that. It's a process. But I will say, in growing up different, one, it's all I've ever known. But two, it made me look at things differently. Instead of saying like I can't, I was like, okay, how could I? If I had to, what would I do? If I wanted to do this, what would I have to do personally? And I didn't understand conceptually what was going on, but I quickly learned there is no universal fix to an individual problem. And you will feel real dumb and real frustrated if you try and do what everyone else does who is not relatively similar to you. So I think it taught me how to adapt, and so fast and so creatively. That creativity led to what I experience now, which is instead of looking at a problem with one solution, yes or no, there could be many. And why not consider the other ones, even if it's different? So that ability to adapt led me to find a way to lift weights. Lifting weights turned into lifting 135 pounds, 225 pounds, 315, 405. And as I got heavier, the bar would slide off. So I designed a hook and then it held, stronger. And then as I got to 595, it started to slide off and blood would pool out of my fingers. So I was like, how do we make this even worse? I used skin tack spray and then an additional wrap and a hook. And I ended up breaking a world record at 675 pounds with one hand and diabetes hanging out of my back pocket. I think all of that could have only happened because I made the choice to say, like, how could I, instead of like a final or fatal decision of like, I can't because of X. I can't because of diabetes. I can't because of disability, which I would have been correct, but I wouldn't have been right, you know? And I think there's a big distinction there.
It really brought out a lot of your internal passions, it sounds
Yes.
like.
It
Now,
it made me realize my passion is not limited to my condition, and that could apply to diabetes or anything, but there is usually a way, and sometimes it's a way that's already paved, sometimes it's a way you have to pave yourself. It's not fair. It's not. And I really like to talk about that because I think from my perspective, people might see, or even you, Gary, they see if you're doing good and it's like the highlight reel. I want people to understand it shouldn't have to be this way, but because it is, what can we do with where we're at right now to make it a little bit better? Or my version to make it suck a little bit less.
yeah, I mean, we're real people, and we have days where things really suck. I mean,
Yeah.
I have days my glucose levels are terrible. I have more days like that than I'd like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you have days where, you're just laying around eating junk and
Yeah.
getting fat. We're like that. We're real people, and it's important for everybody to understand that. I
It
met
removes
Gary
the guilt.
Hall, the Olympic swimmer, years ago. He has type 1 diabetes. And it inspired me when I learned that, he didn't really excel as a swimmer until he got diabetes. I mean, before that, he was a good swimmer, but not exceptional. And, getting diabetes sort of gave him new focus. You get to a point where you just say, screw it. I'm gonna beat the odds. I'm just gonna overcome this. And like you said, I'm going to adapt. And adaptation is something that all of us have to do because everybody has challenges in their lives. Everyone has limitations, and we got to adapt to overcome those kind of things. And clearly, you have a lot of expertise in this field of resistance training, muscle building. What role does muscle play in our lives, in being healthy, living long, and in diabetes for that?
Yeah, I earned my degree in exercise science, and I mostly because I'm petty, and I was told I couldn't. I'm a one-handed guy living in a two-handed world. They're like, "Yeah, it's not really for you." I'm like, "Okay, watch me." So a little pettiness, but I think that can be beneficial to us. I fell in love with muscle building mostly because I was told I couldn't. I have an asymmetrical body, and it's always bodybuilding is promoted as a symmetrical sport. So I took on that challenge and I found ways to build muscle, and that was my whole come up on both social media and my first career, fitness, building a body that people would put on the cover of magazine or that they would put in front of like the limelight, even though my for so long I thought my body was broken, you know? And that was through muscle building. But we have the general health benefits of, like a better metabolism, being strong enough to avoid injury, even as we get into like different groups of osteopenia, osteoporosis, like avoiding other health complications in general, like avoiding the potential complications that come with being overweight or obesity as defined by like different health markers, joint pressure. There's so many benefits, to that. But the mental benefits, I feel like people don't really talk about those. You have to learn how to fail to build muscle. You have to be pushing to progressive overload or constantly putting yourself in a position to be somewhere where you haven't been before and to be okay with messing up.
I
Well,
have a hard time with that, Chris, and
with what?
with failing. And when I go to the gym, because I lift usually 3 days a week, not like you.
Okay.
I mean, I'm there for maybe an hour at a time, but it bothers me when I fail, when I'm not able to complete that last set. I feel like I fail. Is that, I mean, should I feel that way? Should I feel like I should be able to complete every set, or is that not what this is about?
So one of my big rules is never should all over yourself. It's always a always a bad thing to do. We should all over ourselves all the time. I should have my diabetes better controlled. I should be better at this. That's all a lie. That's not real. Don't should all over yourself. And I think just to language is a huge part of what kept me stuck, but also what's helped me help so many people. It's not the failing in the gym that bothers you. It's what you think about the failing that bothers you because the failing is the necessary process to achieve a max. Like for you to know your max, like what is strength if it's not tested? How can you ever say you're strong if you've never pushed it to that limit? You don't know that you're strong if you've never failed and learned your upper limit. So I think it's redefining what failing and failure is because failing is a verb. It's like stubbing your toe. It happens. Okay, cool. But failure is an identity. That's like a noun. It's something you adapt and become. When I miss a lift in the gym, that's information or data that I interpret, similar to high blood sugar. It's not a signifier that I suck or I'm incapable. It's a signifier of the moment. And there's no other emotion aside from the one I give it. So whether it's failing in the gym or diabetes, it's kind of like getting an incredible meal from your favorite chef, pouring a pound of salt on it and be like, wow, this meal sucks. Well, yeah, you took something that was good and then you made it bad. So I get excited when I miss a lift because I'm like, I'm one step closer to getting stronger. Every time you miss a lift and you understand, like, oh, I missed a lift because I didn't have it today. That means I'm closer to tomorrow because you're not there for today. You're there for the long term goal. If we judged ourselves on our worst moments, like how dare you make a long term decision on a short term action? That's unfair to who you are and who you're becoming.
So it sounds
So
like I should be thinking in terms of giving it my all and not completing 3 sets.
now, if we want to get specific, let's talk program design. When it comes to muscle building, progressive overload is important, but there is nothing you can do in a single day with 100% intensity that would be long term programming at 80% intensity. I would rather you be 80% on track for 2 years than 100% on track for 2 weeks. And this is the difference between working out and training. People who work out go to the gym and they lift weights. People who train have an intentional program design and they know what they're doing and why because they have a long term goal. It's kind of like driving versus having a GPS with a destination. Most people don't really just drive for no reason, but most people go in the gym just because they think it's kind of good. I highly encourage people to have a plan. If you want to build muscle, you need to be doing things that build muscle. Similarly, if you want to get better at basketball, you don't play tennis to get better at playing basketball. I find most people are guilty of that. So the gym is the one place where we're like, I got this. You know, you go to your endocrinologist, hopefully. You get sick, you go to a doctor, your car makes noises, you go to the mechanic. In the gym, people are like, I can do this myself. It's so important to either learn or hire someone to learn because it is a skill and it is a knowledge set that a lot of people don't have. I went to school for it, where most people think it's just 3 sets of 10. The goal is to get stronger. And in order to get stronger, you need progressive overload or you need to be challenging yourself to do more than you did last time. Now, progressive overload can be in multiple fashions. It could be in the weight, it could be in the rest periods, it can be in the frequency. We have a principle called FIT or frequency, intensity, time, or type. Those are all different variables that you can have progressive overload or doing a little bit more in that specific variable. Maybe you can do 3 sets of 10 with 60 seconds rest. You can either go up in weight, 5%, 10%, Or you can reduce the time you're resting a little bit, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, for a new challenge. We all have heard the phrase like insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. If you constantly lift the same 10 pounds or the same 45 pounds, what do you expect to change if you change nothing? We
Hmm.
understand the concept, but we don't apply it to the gym because we're like, well, I sweat, it was hard, therefore it was good.
So the change doesn't have to be the weight. It
It
could
doesn't.
be the rest interval. It could be the pace at which you do it.
Absolutely, and
It
it
could
depends on
be
your goal. Now, if you're building muscle, specifically building muscle, there are competing schools of thought on this, but, there's the time under tension school of thought, like slowing down reps, to have more time under tension total. There's total aggregate weight lifted, so if you do 100 pounds 10 times, it's 1,000 pounds. In general, what I've seen the most consistent school of thought is periodized progressive overload. So just on a regular basis, going up in weight when you can to the same rep range and then starting over again. So let's say you have a rep range of 12 and you can do 100 pounds for a bench press. You do that 100 pounds next week. Can you go up 5 pounds? You do 105 pounds for 12. Great. 110 pounds for 12. 115 pounds, you can only get 10. Okay, we're kind of getting to that limit there. We're kind of struggling. Let's stay at that weight until we can get 12. That is one strategy. If we wanted to make it a little bit more efficient, like, okay, let's go a little bit heavier one day a week, maybe 8 reps, and we could do 130 pounds. And then later in the week, we'll do 12 reps and we can do 115 pounds. We have different strategies, and there's so many different ways to do this, but you have to pick one. You have to pick a specific strategy and allow a longer term goal, meaning not just today or this week, maybe over the course of the next 3 months, so that you can go from point A, where you are, to point B stronger. Stronger with volume or reps, 8 to 12 reps is shown to build hypertrophy or muscle size over time. Now, here's where people get lost. The gym breaks down muscle, doesn't necessarily build it because you could build the biggest car engine in the world. If there is no gas, how fast will that car engine go? Nowhere. If you do not have the nutrition, specifically calories and protein, to contribute to muscle gaining, it will not be optimized. Can you still gain muscle in a calorie deficit or eating less calories than your body needs? Yes, to a degree. But in general, unfortunately, when you want a muscle goal or a weight loss goal, that is not just a gym thing. It is both a gym thing, a nutrition thing, and a diabetes thing too. So with us, we do have to worry about that.
Yeah, I've read about eccentric
Mhm.
movement, where the muscle is lengthening and not
More the
contracting.
time under tension theory.
Yeah, yeah. Do you subscribe to that? Do you feel that the kind of
Some
the down movement of the weight lift, is that as important as the actual lifting part?
So what I will say is I don't like to pick one specific theory and like 100% commit to it, but rather blending them. If there is a lot of data coming out about eccentric movement, about progressive overload, about total volume, use all elements of that. Let's look at the mistakes most people make. Most people on the eccentric or the gravity movement, like say a bench press when the bar is coming back down to your chest, or a squat when you're going down to the ground, when you're going with gravity, most people try and let gravity do the work. So they will press as hard as they can or squat up as hard as they can. But when it's going down with gravity, they're like, gravity, take it. And then they're doing half the work. Now, there's eccentric doing 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Maybe. I do know that eccentric loads cause more damage. And when I say damage, I mean muscle damage, which is the goal of the gym. But is it unnecessary? There could be a rate of limiting returns. At the end of the day, control the down motion and the up motion. Let's just be
Yeah,
simple. Control both of them.
yeah. It's
Don't let
similar
gravity do
to,
half the work.
I do some biking also, and if I have my toes clipped into the pedals, you get more power because you're using your leg muscles in two directions and not just pushing down.
Yes.
So I can see where you would get additional benefit by thinking about working when gravity is helping you as well as when it's not.
Yes. And I want to clarify too, when I was a professional power lifter, the goal is not muscle growth necessarily, maybe in specific phases throughout the year. But when we made our programs were for the year. So we had macro cycles of a few months and micro cycles of a few weeks. And we might be in a muscle building phase because the goal would be to build muscle tissue. and then take advantage of that new muscle tissue by getting it as strong as possible.
Wow.
So in a muscle building phase, we'd be on 8 to 12 reps, 4 to 5 sets. In a strength building phase, we would be 3 to 5 reps, anywhere from 4 to 8 sets. So more sets, less reps, which there is a rep continuum. You can Google it or I can include it. There's a rep continuum based on how many reps and your goal. Pure power output is usually like 1 to 3 reps. Strength is 3 to 5, 6 reps usually. Hypertrophy or building muscle is 8 to 12 reps. And then endurance is usually 12 plus reps. Again, there's always going to be conflicting data on newer research. There's so much stuff coming out and there's going to be crossover. Yes, you can build muscle in the 15 rep range and the 4 rep range. But what I'm talking about is optimization based on the governing body of what's out there.
Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, is brought to you by Integrated Diabetes Services, where experience meets expertise, passion meets compassion, and diabetes care is personal because we live it too. Our team of clinicians, all living with type 1 diabetes, understands the challenges firsthand. We're here to help no matter where you are in the world. From glucose management to self-care strategies, the latest tech, sports and exercise, weight loss, type 1 pregnancy, and emotional well-being, we've got you covered. We offer consultations in English and Spanish via phone, video chat, email, and text. Want to learn more? Visit integrateddiabetes.com or email info@integrateddiabetes.com to schedule a consultation.
You mentioned a couple of times that the goal is to damage your muscle.
Mhm.
Explain that.
In the gym, you are breaking down muscle fibers. You are causing damage. That's what it's lactic acid too. But there's a feeling of burning or pain or any of that. Like you feel sore. That sore is micro trauma to the muscle fiber. People do something similar. It's not the same thing, but something similar in like skincare, where they do like microdermabrasion or laser, where they cause micro trauma for recovery to come in and the new tissue is better than the old. In muscle building, it's similar. So when you cause that micro trauma to the muscle fibers, you give rise to growth. It's part of one of few processes of building muscle, but you have to think about that. If you are causing intentionally micro trauma to the muscle fiber, which is, it's good, that's a good stress, you now need something to help repair that. And that repair process is the nutrition piece. So if you are just causing micro trauma to the muscle fiber, but you're not eating relative to the goal, you're kind of doing it in a very inefficient way. I don't want to say it's useless, but it would be much more useful if you're at least having your proteins, carbs, and fats, or whatever the way you structure your nutrition, to be intentional.
If you break something and then you fix it with crazy glue, the glue is actually stronger than the original substance was. So your food is like your crazy glue that's coming in and doing this repair that makes it more solid and stronger than it was originally.
Yes, and imagine not having that glue. In if we're talking about a broken vase and you're like, hey, I want to put this back together, but no glue, you'd be like, that's not a good
Yeah,
idea. But
duct
people
tape
do that
doesn't
all
work.
the time with nutrition. And we go even a little further to diabetes. Like when I was dealing with non-diabetic clients, I would always say the number one thing is going to be nutrition. With diabetic clients, I have to change that. The number one thing is blood sugar management. Because the second you are riding, not second, but like if you are consistently riding extremely high and you're not managing your blood sugars to where you probably could, I think we all know there's like what we do, what we can do, what we should do. There's levels, and that can change. But consistently high blood sugars make it considerably harder to build muscle mass. So, and I'm sure you could speak to that more, Gary, too, from like a scientific perspective, but just know you can't bypass diabetes management if you want to build like optimal muscle mass. That
Absolutely.
has to be like the main goal.
Yeah, and it's not just while you're lifting, it's around the clock. It affects your sleep, it affects your hydration level, your glycogen storage. But in this case, it's also affecting how much fuel your body's retaining. If you're running glucoses that are high and you're spilling it in the urine, you're just peeing away the energy that you consumed. Protein is, you said, is also a key element of muscle building. How much protein should people be having?
I'm always careful of answering very specific questions, but I will give a very political response. I will speak from my perspective than what I've seen. In general, for me, I like to be close to my desired body weight in grams of protein per day. That is on the higher amount than most people, especially if you look at RDA, which I do not go off of personally. I have my own feelings and reasonings for that. But in general, from the studies that I've seen, anywhere between zero point 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein per lean body pound. In general, you could do zero point 0.8 times your current body weight. That can be completely different with outliers. If you are morbidly obese, that would be a different factor. Or if you are drastically underweight, that could be a different, again, outliers. But in general, I found very good success with most people being around the zero point 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per lean body pound.
So, as an example, let's take an average person that weighs 150 pounds and isn't obese. They're in reasonable shape. You would take 80% of that, so it's about 120 pounds of lean body mass.
Yeah.
So they
So
need somewhere, close to 120 grams of protein a day. A little less would be fine, but somewhere in that neighborhood. And is it the same for
something
men and women?
It is very similar for men and women. If you got specific with women's menstrual cycles, depending on their follicular or luteal phase, they process specifically carbs differently. So you could get into the weeds about that, especially if you go into like PCOS or oligomenorrhea or any specific offshoots, which that is a hyper specific individualized attention protocol for someone. But I'm going to try and give generalized advice here. When I would build or help build a nutrition program, we would use something like the Mifflin-St. Joubert equation or the Harris-Benedict equation to calculate total energy needs, calorie needs, and then determine macronutrient percentages. All of that sounds super fancy and scientific. So let me just talk about, in general, I've seen most women do really well between the 120 to 150 gram of protein mark, and most men do really well between the 160 to 200 gram of protein mark. The second you are over 200 plus pounds, it requires a little bit of outlier. We got to talk about what that makeup is, because a person who is 200 pounds and 15% body fat is very different than a person that's 200 pounds and 35% body fat. So, but those are the general amounts. In writing hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of programs, I've seen those numbers be relatively in that spectrum.
Okay. What do you find are the better sources of protein?
So, arguably speaking, and from a lot of the research I've seen, the better sources of proteins are the ones you can consistently get, afford, and sustain. So we're going to start there.
It's like, what's the best exercise? It's
Yeah, exactly. It's
what
like,
you'll
well,
do.
depends. I can tell you the best exercise for me is not monkey bars, but maybe it would be for you. So in general, I like people to pick strategy. So your exercise and nutrition program should be something that gets you results you don't hate and that you can stick to. So it's not like paleo or keto, or it's not a specific thing. It's like, what can you sustain that doesn't make you miserable, that actually gets you results? Being able to sustain a program beats any optimized on paper program day in and day out. If you cannot stick to it, it will not work. I don't care how good it is on paper. That's just the end of the conversation there. For protein, me personally, what do I enjoy? I'm not going to eat stuff I don't enjoy. So lean chicken breast, one of the easiest ways to get high protein without filling up your fats or carbs. Whereas if I did a fatty, like 70% protein ground beef, very high fat, that's going to hit my fats for the day. The way I treated macronutrients or tracking macronutrients was like budgeting. You have 3 numbers for the day, your proteins, carbs, and fats. You have your goal. You have to be within 5 grams of those over and under. Once you spend that number for the day, you're done. You're done. Now, if you want to eat all that by 10 a.m., great. That's going to be really tough for the rest of the day. You don't want to eat all day, that night is going to be a lot of eating. That is completely okay when it comes to non-diabetics. It gets a lot more difficult when we have people with diabetes, because you hit your carbs for the day, then you go low. What happens? You have to eat more carbs, so you just messed up your nutrition. But diabetes management comes first. So I would do things like creating low carb reserves, where people would have 20, 30 grams of carbs for the day in reserve. So when they hit their carbs, by the time they were able to see like, okay, I'm good, my blood sugar is good, then they can eat the rest of those carbs. Case by case basis, we try and make our best way. When I was a professional bodybuilder, I would do cardio in the mornings, and I tried to do fasted because there's some evidence on fasted, some not. I could rarely get through it because my blood sugar would crash. And my old coach would be like, "Oh man, you didn't do it fasted." I'm like, "Diabetes. I will die." Like it just can't happen for some people. So there's
Do you
methods,
find
but
it's best to have the protein before lifting, after lifting, or does it not really matter? It's just what you consume through the course of the day.
so it's more total daily intake that matters most, specifically when we're talking about building muscle or losing fat. The only time nutrient portioning or frequency of meals plays a bigger role is one, diabetes management to make sure,
Mhm.
that. And two, high level like athlete performance, like a professional sport. Those people can have upwards of 8, 12 meals a day. They're really tracking that for a performance. If
Mhm.
you're not going for performance specifically, daily totals matter most.
How do you manage your glucose when you're working out?
Oh, it used to be the wild ass gas method.
Mhm.
So that was difficult. Now that I'm on a pump, that is, oh man, it's been so nice. But in general, I usually had to, it depends on where I was in my cycle. So if I was doing heavy lifting above 75% of my 1 rep max, now notice I said that, that means I was tracking a lot of stuff. When you are more specific and you have intent, you get better results. Intent and specificity play a huge role in progress. Otherwise, you're just guessing. So when I was above 75% of my 1 rep max going heavier, I tended to go higher throughout my lift. I would have increases, jumps in my blood sugar. So I would either not treat and allow myself to cruise at 160, 180, knowing it would come down, or I would cut my treatment by like 75%. So instead of taking 2 units, I'd take half a unit. Even then, it's a slow process unless I was using a Freza or something like that, which I didn't have the whole time that I was competing. So it really is an individualized approach, but we do have data to see like certain exercises that are aerobic or anaerobic have certain effects. And there was a cool chart back in the day with JDRF Peak program where they had the
Mhm.
chart. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I'm sure you have some of your own as well, but what do you recommend when it comes to like, I never liked the idea of like, oh, when you're lifting weights, this will happen because lifting weights could mean different energy systems, let
Yeah,
alone
I
different.
see that myself.
Yeah.
When I do lower body strength training, my glucose does tend to drop.
Hmm,
When I do upper body work, it either holds stable or rises a little bit.
interesting.
The time of day also makes an enormous difference. Now, the earlier in the day, the less likely you are to see a glucose decline. Later in the day, more likely to see a decline. So there's a lot of variables, but the
Yeah.
individual responses vary considerably from person to person. So it's not a matter of, like you said, it's not a matter of winning every time. Or what was the
Yeah.
phrase you used? That you don't want to shoot all over yourself.
And it goes back to what we said at the beginning of this, which is adaptation,
Yeah. All
being
we do,
able to adapt.
we try to put ourselves in the best position to succeed,
Yep.
and
And
that's the best we
that can
can do.
start with what insulin do you have on board before you go into your program, which
Mhm.
I noticed my biggest mess ups, blood sugar in the gym, was when I didn't account for what insulin I went on board and I pretended like I was exercising in an insulinless vacuum.
Yeah, the glucose response with any form of physical activity, it's a balance between the glucose you're burning and the adrenaline you're producing that drives the
Mm,
blood sugar up, and that balance changes with different kinds of workouts. So when you described your power lift workouts, more adrenaline, less glucose metabolism. When you're doing muscle enlargement exercise or cardio relate type exercise, less adrenaline, more glucose metabolism. So the blood sugars tend to drop. And there's a whole spectrum in between those two.
I used
So
to
it's
really struggle because I would do either a walking warm up or an extended warm up where I'm moving, but it's definitely low intensity, steady state type, which genuinely drops people's blood sugar. But I would do that right before my high intensity, less glucose burning, but more adrenaline. So it kind of would balance out. But if I did my warm up for a little bit too long, I'd be in a
Mhm.
dangerous position where, like, if I
What kind of
treat this
warm up
right
do you do before a lifting session?
so it depends on the goal. If I'm going for strength or if I'm going for building muscle. When I was doing powerlifting, a lot of it was certain muscle activations, foam rollers, dynamic warm-ups relative to the movements. So in general, I like to warm up dynamically relative to the movements I'm about to do. I'm not just going to do arm circles for the sake of doing arm circles, not to say that's a bad thing, but there are better ways to go about it than a 1970s PE class. So I think if you're going to squat, if you're doing legs and you're doing hamstrings, quads, and calves and hip flexors, you should probably warm up those things. So
Yeah.
some sort of potentially jumping movements, potentially isolating individual leg movements, foam rolling certain muscles that might be overactive. We sit constantly. Most people's quads are way too tight. There's a lot of issues with the way we just live our lives in general. So I like to warm up areas that are regularly problematic. Hip flexors and quads tend to be some of the most problematic muscle groups that tend to have effect on the opposite side of the kinetic chain. So lower back, a lot of pain in people. And weak glutes, inability to contract or use the glutes. So that can result in so many problems. All of my warm ups like that involve those
Mm.
kind of muscle groups.
I heard you pick on 1970s gym classes. Listen, don't pick on
Trying to bring
those.
them
Those
back,
were
honestly. I'm trying to bring
uh,
them back.
personally, I found that jumping back and forth over a line for 60 seconds really prepared me well for archery. It just got those archery muscles really in gear. And
Really gets you going, huh? I love a heart
yeah,
rate with an arrow, you know? That's
yeah.
high
We
heart
would jump.
rate at a dangerous time.
We would jump left to right over the line, then front and back over the line, and we'd straddle the line. It was just jumping over a line. That was our warm up, no matter what activity we did
It's
in that
yeah,
gym
just gonna
class.
do the arm circles thing. I'm like, if I see arm circles anymore, I'm like, please stop doing arm circles. This is a perfect example in time to say one of my favorite phrases on stage. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that applies to a
Good
lot of
point.
things in
Something I learned at the ADA scientific sessions this year, they were comparing people with type 1 diabetes to non-diabetics in terms of strength gains, aerobic capacity, etc. And one difference they did find was that after age 40, recovery takes quite a bit longer in people with diabetes, specifically when you're engaging in resistance work or high impact exercises. So, for people who are middle aged and getting up there in years, do you think it's pretty important to alternate types of workouts each day to avoid soreness or injuries, or do you not think it makes a whole lot of difference?
So there's a few concepts here. There's something called MRV or maximum recoverable volume. There's generalized like acceptance of you want to keep around 48 to 72 hours in between the same muscle groups, especially if you're causing damage or micro trauma to the muscle fiber. It's a little different if you're doing power or speed, agility, quickness, things that don't really cause damage. There might be nervous system fatigue, but that's different. You're probably, if you're listening to this, you're probably not a NFL combine prep candidate, but
You never
if
know.
you are, shoot me a message.
Mhm.
But when it comes to time, that data definitely makes sense. And I would just say, stay on the upper spectrum of that. As you notice your recovery, you just have to be honest with yourself and say, like, hey, I did chest or I did push muscles 2 days ago, 48 hours ago, and I still feel a little sore. I don't feel at my best, feel weaker. You should probably push it to the 72-hour mark. You know, you're still within that window. I think that is best. There's the coach versus the athlete in me. You know, the coach is very cautious. I will say, try and get 2 muscle groups in a week. If you can do chest twice a week and back twice a week and legs twice a week, that's fantastic. If you cannot recover from that volume, don't do it. Okay. Prioritize whatever you're preferring. I would get at least an upper body day and a lower body day in per week. If you can do a third or a fourth, fantastic. To me, the best all around process would be 2 upper and 2 lower a week. If you can get 4 days in a week, I'm super, super happy.
Okay.
The athlete in me is like maximize.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
go for it. 2 muscle
Yeah.
groups, chest twice a week, back twice a week, legs twice a week. Vary the rep set schemes so that you recover. 1 day a week when you're doing squats, you can go 5 sets of 10. The other day, you can do 5 sets of 5 speed work to just train the movement. Don't overcomplicate it if you don't need to, you know? So try
Yeah.
and listen to the coach part of me.
I'm going to hit 60 this year. I still think I'm indestructible, invincible, and all those other words.
I think it's the 1 arm push-ups. That's why you're feeling that way. That was like probably the best and worst gift the universe gave you was like, that's going to make you feel invincible for sure.
Yeah, that's my one redeeming quality is that I'm still able to do those. I
I
mean,
always loved when you would show people up doing that. So that's,
oh
if people
yeah,
have not seen that, you need to see Gary do some 1 arm push-ups because it is a sight. Coming
yeah.
from a 1 arm guy, that's verification and
It
credibility.
is one arm pull ups I can do, but
They're
they're
tough.
getting
That's tough.
tougher. Yeah.
Yeah, pull-ups are always like a more weakness for me. It's just a hard muscle group, and it's something I don't train
Yeah. I've got
for
that
everyone.
strength to
Please don't
weight
get upset.
ratio working for me because I don't weigh a whole lot. So it does help.
That's good. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's very important for everyone to understand. Don't be upset at the skills you don't have from the work you don't do.
Yeah.
You can't pay your way to results in diabetes,
Mhm.
in gym, and in life. I still love like the gym and the science behind the gym, but I've even taken a step back from being a bodybuilder or powerlifter. Now I'm just okay with like being general, which is really weird for me because that was my life for so long. But it made me realize like everyone has different chapters and it's
Yeah.
okay to close a chapter
Yeah. You're just being
when
Chris.
it's and that was hard to do because I was Chris the
Mhm.
bodybuilder for so long. And now I'm like, I have the information, but also it's just not the same passion I had. Now it's more
Yeah.
health and wellness instead
Yeah.
of like crazy bodybuilding. Ah,
Did want to say something about the GLP-1
yes.
medications that so many people are using now
And
to help
GLP-3s
with
that are
weight
coming out
loss.
now.
Yeah. But these medications will often cause people to cut back to a dangerously low level of protein
Oh,
intake, and that can lead to muscle atrophy.
yes.
So it is an important consideration that you still take in adequate amounts of protein when you're using those medications. And again, the caloric intake may not be sufficient either in general to support muscle development. So you should really work with a dietitian who knows what they're doing.
Yes.
We've got some really good ones here at Integrated Diabetes, as well as exercise physiologists who deal with this on a full time basis. I mean, you're an inspirational guy, Chris, no doubt about it. But where do you get your inspiration? Do you have a hero?
I've always kind of leaned on I started my speaking career in the diabetes space. And even while I was still battling like the mental health issues of having a disability and trying to be comfortable with that disability, the people I've always looked to most are the kids that I've met along the way in the diabetes space who have just blown me away with like how they saw life. And I met a few of them that I still connect with to this day, 20
Mm.
years later, which is insane.
I've seen you at the Children with Diabetes conferences over the
Yes.
years. Is there anyone that stands out? One kid that
Yes,
really
there is.
sticks?
There is. And I got such a cool moment that I love to share. Their name is Owl. They're about to go to college, I believe, which is so crazy. But this story pretty much changed my life. I was at Children with Diabetes, Friends for Life, and I was still hiding my hand. I had a glove on my hand for 12 plus years. And I spent all day with this little girl, and she grabbed my hand over my glove, and she pretty much looked at me and she was like, "It's okay. You don't have to hide around me." She was 11 years old at the time. And that like broke me. I was just like, all these people were here to see me speak and so excited, but she's the only one who actually like saw me. I used that story in a speaking competition and I won the speaking competition a few years ago. 2 years ago, I went to that family's house in Oregon. I showed the mom and Owl that speaking competition video. And Owl was like, "My God, that girl must be so excited for what she did for you. Like, that's incredible." And I got to have that moment where I was like, "Owl, that girl is you." And she lost it. So it's one of those like I have her picture up on
Mm.
my refrigerator. I talk with her family all the time.
I got goosebumps when you
Yeah,
said that.
that it was such a full circle moment because I remember buying that little girl when she was 11 a hat and she was just diagnosed and like all this stuff happened and her sister was just diagnosed and her brother and all this and it was such a crazy moment. So I don't really have like inspirational celebrities or figures. It's these kids that I'm like almost jealous of. I'm like, you have hope. And it took me so long to have hope. And now I vow to be the person I never had growing up. So that is my inspiration to
Well, you
be
give
the
a
thing for the people.
you now you're giving a lot of people hope. So thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on the
Of
program and
course.
sharing your story, your inspiration, and some really helpful tips. I learned a number of things. I was taking notes
Awesome.
as you were speaking.
I don't get to
Some
talk
things I'm going to
exercise
try.
science much anymore. So it was nice.
And and honestly, this notion of you should never, don't should all over yourself. Those are words of wisdom. I mean, I'm going to take
I
that to
appreciate
heart.
it.
So thanks again for coming on. So I hope everybody learned a little bit today and got a little bit of inspiration from what Chris had to say. And, everybody has challenges in their life. And remember, when the going gets tough, the tough adapt. We all have to do that to a certain extent. So thank you all for joining. And don't forget to keep thinking like a pancreas.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Scheiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.